And that's after the 9 o'clock news on BBC One with Nicholas Witchell.
The council, which sent a young offender on safari at taxpayers' expense, has called a halt to further trips. But the centre which organised the trip to Africa insists that it was not a holiday. Israeli and PLO officials say they've reached broad agreement on the details of Palestinian self-rule. More suspect packages have been found in chemists' shops in the West Country. And the leader of Russia's extreme right wing is back in Moscow after being expelled from Bulgaria and banned from Germany. Good evening. The government is to issue new guidelines on the treatment of young offenders after a teenager was sent on a trip around Africa and then rearrested soon after he returned to this country. The Home Secretary, Michael Howard, said those responsible had access to more money than sense. Gloucestershire County Council has said that the practice of sending young offenders abroad has been temporarily halted pending a review.
The character-building trip was organised by the Bryn Millin Centre in North Wales, where fees are said to be £500 a week cheaper than secure accommodation, and which, according to Gloucestershire Social Services, has a high success rate with young offenders.
What we do is provide them with a chance for change, and we can demonstrate that we do that far, far more successfully than locking children up who have offended.
Covering 13,000 miles in 11 weeks, taking in the pyramids, the Nile and Victoria Falls, the trip is seen by many MPs as a reward for wrongdoing. And reports that the 17-year-old was arrested for alleged drink driving just after returning home have left MPs incredulous.
Well, I think most people would say that the social workers in Gloucestershire have taken leave of their senses, wouldn't they? And with taxpayers' money.
Anything that appears to be a holiday for an offender or rewarding bad behaviour is something that rightly inspires outrage. What we need is tough ways of dealing with offenders quickly in the community, which addresses the causes of their crime as well as the actual crime.
The Social Service Department that paid for the trip now says it's reviewing its policy and won't pay for more trips in the meantime, but it defends the original decision.
We don't believe it was a holiday. We still believe it was the most effective way of working with this young man. And I would say, for those critics who talk about economy, is that it is cheaper than if we'd merely locked him up.
And the Home Secretary's belief in locking people up as an effective deterrent has been questioned in a new study by the Prison Reform Trust, which says that the government's own figures show that it has a marginal effect on the crime rate. Mr. Howard is also working on stiffer community penalties, while Cabinet colleagues emphasise consistent standards.
Challenging activities, particularly for the ones who've had difficulties at school, is the right way forward. We do need rigorous programmes in the community, but programmes which feel a bit more like punishment and a bit less like a holiday.
Ministers are determined to put a stop to foreign trips for young offenders, and they're confident that the vast majority of voters agree with a clampdown. Conservatives are extremely sensitive to claims that they're no longer the party of law and order, and the emphasis on tough community work to be unveiled in the new year will be a significant part of the fight back. Hugh Edwards, BBC News, Westminster.
The Israeli Foreign Minister, Shimon Peres, said there's been a meeting of minds at the talks with the PLO in Cairo. But the head of the PLO delegation, Abu Mazen, pointedly refused to confirm the Israeli interpretation. The talks were designed to ease the delayed introduction of limited Palestinian self-rule in the Gaza Strip and Jericho. But disagreements about the size of the Jericho area and who controls the border posts between the Palestinian areas and Jordan and Egypt remain at the centre of the disagreement.
By this morning, the third day of talks, the hope had faded that there might be some kind of breakthrough here. Instead, the day was to produce some unspectacular progress and a promise of more meetings. But when they met under President Mubarak's chairmanship, the Israelis weren't prepared to offer the Palestinians enough to satisfy them on 3 points: the size of a self-governing Jericho, access from Jericho to the state of Jordan, and security on the roads leading out of Gaza. Afterwards, there was a determined effort to present the disagreement as something that could soon be overcome.
It is not simple for either side to make concessions, to make compromises. It was done, I think, in an air of understanding and fairness on the two parties, and even when we argued in a rather civilized and agreeable way, And the fact is that finally we have reached a meeting of our minds.
The head of the PLO side, Mahmoud Abbas, was carefully neutral. The ideas raised here would be submitted to the Israeli and PLO leaderships, he said. But Amre Moussa, the Egyptian foreign minister, was determined to be positive.
I would say that the process has there is a good opportunity for the process to move forward.
Nevertheless, as the midday call to prayer rang out and they left the palace, it was soon clear that the Israeli offer still wasn't enough for the Palestinian leadership. For Mr. Perez, who went off for a leisurely post-negotiation lunch beside the Nile, this is all part of the negotiating process. He'd have liked a real breakthrough here because that would have got the whole process going again. But he knows that Israeli public opinion wouldn't tolerate it if he and his colleagues seemed to be pushovers in the negotiations.
I think we really tried very sincerely to enable them to go ahead, short of any security problems that we may have had.
Is there a danger that Yasser Arafat will be so weakened that he's not really a partner that you can do business with anymore?
Every road of negotiations is full of dangers, and our task is to overcome them.
Mr. Perez wandered off to see the women who'd made the bread for his lunch. In Israeli terms, he's an ultra-dove where the Palestinians are concerned. For now, he's allowed to run things his way, but time is getting short. Mr. Arafat himself came to Cairo tonight to discuss the latest offer. Given the way his political support is crumbling, he's remarkably cheerful. He did win some concessions today, but time's getting short for him too. John Simpson, BBC News, Cairo.
And John Simpson joins us now live from Cairo. John, is it any clearer what has actually been agreed tonight?
Yes, we've obtained the details of the agreement, and it looks as though the problem about those humiliating searches that Palestinians have to undergo when they cross into Israel at the moment from Jordan, say, or from Gaza, or from Egypt, that these at least have been sorted out. There's been a series of agreements, of small-scale agreements, things like Palestinians will be searched by Palestinians if necessary, but in the presence of an Israeli official, that Palestinians will deal with Palestinians' passports, for instance, something which of course doesn't happen at the moment at all, and that luggage, for instance, can be searched by either side. These are very trivial things, perhaps, to the outside world, but to Palestinians in particular, they're very important. The Israelis also offered a larger amount of territory for the area of Jericho, the self-governing area, but it still falls way, way short of what the Palestinians
John,
want.
some of the officials in your report were sounding optimistic. Do you think that this puts the whole process back on track now?
No, I don't think it is on track. Israeli officials certainly are saying tonight that it is possible to get the full withdrawal from Jericho and Gaza by April the 13th, as the Declaration of Principles originally outlined. But I think we've got to question that when so much has been quibbled over in the kind of haggling that we've seen in the last 2 weeks already.
John, thank you very much indeed. Vatican and Israeli negotiators have approved a fundamental agreement in which the Roman Catholic Church and the Jewish state formally recognize each other. The document is the result of 17 months' work and will lead to special representatives being exchanged who will act as envoys. An exchange of ambassadors is expected when more detailed work has been completed. In Northern Ireland, a meeting of more than 300 Republican activists has heard strong criticism of the peace declaration agreed by the British and Irish Prime Ministers. The meeting was also attended by some IRA prisoners on Christmas parole.
The headline writers offered their own interpretation of last night's meeting, a meeting which stepped back from outright rejection of the Downing Street Declaration, but one which was still extremely hostile. Republican activists made it clear the document was unacceptable without clarification, although some did think it could be built upon in the future. It's exactly 2 weeks since the British and Irish Prime Ministers launched their initiative. Since then, the IRA have been considering their position, and it was stressed again yesterday that they wouldn't be rushed into any final decision. Politicians, though, were clearly disappointed at what had emerged.
they must know that there will not be any other similar opportunity for many years to come to get off the hook that they undoubtedly have wanted to get off now for some time. And it's for that reason, and perhaps that reason alone, that I feel optimistic with a small o, that there will be a cessation of violence.
The IRA have consistently operated on the basis of accepting every concession that weak governments offer and then asking for more. They're doing exactly the same thing today. They are true to form.
One prisoner told the Tyrone meeting there should be no doubt about the strength of what he described as IRA volunteers. But he added, we cannot just have war. It would be silly to throw away any opportunity. The dilemma remains, therefore, that the two governments want an end to violence before any talks with the Republicans, while they insist the terms of any peace agreement have to be negotiated. So far, the circle hasn't been squared. Matthew Amreliwala, BBC News, Belfast.
A bomb has exploded tonight in the centre of Belfast. The device was in Upper Library Street near the city centre. A passerby was taken to hospital. A security force patrol was in the area at the time, but it's understood that its members, its members escaped injury. There have been security alerts at Boots stores in the West Country after 2 more fire bombs were discovered. Yesterday, 2 devices were found in boxes of hair products, also bought in Boots. Packages found today at branches in Penzance and Helston were destroyed by controlled explosions. Police say the firebomb campaign could be the work of animal rights groups.
The package requiring the attention of a bomb disposal robot at Boots branch in Penzance turned out to be a hoax, but another device left in the chain store in Helston was detonated by the bomb squad. 2 other firebombs, which came to light yesterday in Cornwall, had been concealed in these Boots hair products. One was bought by a woman in Liskeard, the other caused limited damage when it ignited in Bodmin. Security at Boots' 1,100 branches throughout the country has been stepped up. No one has claimed responsibility for the devices, but police say they are similar to those used in previous incidents by animal rights extremists. The Animal Liberation Front says a group called the Justice Department has warned that up to 6 devices would be placed in Boots outlets in the south. Bill Turnbull, BBC News.
The Archbishop of Canterbury, Dr. George Carey, has called off a visit to northern Sudan rather than go as a guest of the Islamic fundamentalist government there. Lambeth Palace said his movements would have been restricted, but the Sudanese have denied this. Dr. Carey will not now visit the capital Khartoum, but travel to rebel-held areas of the mainly Christian southern Sudan. He leaves tonight with a message of support for those who've suffered on both sides of the 10-year-old civil war.
It's the suffering of the people of southern Sudan, far from the niceties of diplomatic footwork, that's the main focus of Dr. Carey's visit. Makeshift hospitals are overcrowded with victims of Sudan's largely forgotten civil war. Many civilians whose villages have been bombed, apparently by government warplanes for no specific military reason. Others are casualties of factional fighting between rival rebel groups seeking independence for the south. The fundamentalist Islamic policies of President Omar el-Bashir's government in Khartoum are partly blamed for fueling the war in the largely Christian south. The United Nations has condemned the displacement of millions of villagers. Amnesty International has investigated disappearances and summary trials. Dr. Carey's will be the highest profile fact-finding mission. Today he expressed regret at cancelling his visit to the government-controlled north. His advisers blame the Sudanese government's last-minute insistence that he go as their official guest.
That would mean that he would undertake their program rather than the church's program, with all that implies about who he would see and where he would go, and who would have access to him.
Sudanese officials objected to Dr. Carey's request to stay with the British ambassador, accusing the British government of hijacking the visit.
We would have liked His Grace's visit to be special and a pastoral visit, and to be a communication with the people, not with the British ambassador, who we respect very much, but we have quite enough of him.
As the Archbishop prepares to enter a war zone, human rights groups believe what he'll see on the ground counts for more than diplomatic contacts.
It's the first time in the 10 years of war that a senior international figure has visited Sudan, not with the intention of speaking to the government and the war makers in the south, but of giving a voice, giving an expression to the concerns and aspirations of ordinary people throughout the Sudan.
In the short term, the effect of the Archbishop's visit will be more symbolic than practical. but in the longer term, he can be a great encouragement to the churches of Sudan, one of the few institutions in the country working for peace and reconstruction. Andrew Burrows, BBC News at Lambeth Palace.
The extreme right-wing Russian politician Vladimir Zhirinovsky has returned to Moscow after he was ordered to leave Bulgaria and was refused entry to Germany. The German government banned him, saying that it didn't want to provide a platform for right-wing statements.
With his bodyguards, Vladimir Zhirinovsky arrived back at Moscow airport tonight, forlorn and dejected, after being kicked out of Bulgaria and kept out of Germany, he says unjustly.
3 visas for Germany. 3 times I have received visa for Germany. It's only provocation. I have all documents in order, but cancelled. Cancelled. For what? For what reason? No reason. Cancelled.
More and more, the government in Moscow are finding Mr. Zhirinovsky an international embarrassment. Several Russian ambassadors have now had to apologize for his bizarre behavior and remarks. And the foreign ministry here have urged people not to give him free publicity. Earlier in Bulgaria, Mr. Zhirinovsky was booed by hundreds of people when he suggested that a friend of his should replace the country's democratically elected president. After Mr. Zhirinovsky laid a wreath at a war memorial, the Bulgarian government gave him 24 hours to get out of the country. They said he had insulted their leader. Mr. Zhirinovsky was quoted as saying he had been treated worse than a prostitute. He wanted to fly next to Germany, but its government then decided to turn him away as well, refusing visas to Mr. Zhirinovsky and his entourage. In Moscow, at the headquarters of Vladimir Zhirinovsky's extreme nationalist party, there was outrage today that he had been banned from 2 major European countries. Despite his popularity here in Russia, abroad, Mr. Zhirinovsky is now being treated as something of a political leper by an international community increasingly worried about his extreme views and the possibility that he could become this country's next president. Ben Brown, BBC News, Moscow.
Police in the United States believe a family vendetta led to a series of parcel bomb attacks in which 5 people were killed. The devices were all hidden in boxes sent to homes and businesses in New York State. The first went off at a house near Buffalo. A second exploded in an apartment block in Rochester. 2 more bombs killed residents in Eden and West Valley. 2 further devices were defused. A woman and 2 men are expected to be charged later tonight in connection with the bombings, which also left 2 people badly injured. In Paris, roads around the River Seine have been closed as the water level continues to rise after heavy storms. Trees along the bank have been partly submerged by the swollen river. Gas and electricity supplies were cut off as a precaution. Widespread flooding around Paris is feared if the bad weather continues. Here, business leaders are concerned that tax increases to be introduced in April could slow down economic recovery, according to a report by the Institute of Directors. The report was published as share prices in London again reached an all-time high. The 100 index was up nearly 50 points. Dealers are said to be optimistic about prospects for the economy.
Business confidence, according to the Institute of Directors, reached a peak last August. Then worries about tax increases in the autumn budget brought it down again. But now the underlying trend is back up, with members reporting orders and output steadily rising. The only worry is that the tax increases coming into effect in April will nip recovery in the bud.
The tax increases are going to be the largest ever in peacetime. They're the equivalent of 7p on income tax. They're going to take about £500 out of the average family budget. This takes a lot of consumer spending away, and of course there's therefore concern because so much of present activity is being consumer driven.
But there's optimism from the housing market, with Britain's biggest building society, the Halifax, forecasting that sales will rise 15% in 1994 and that price rises this time next year will be running at an annual rate of 5%. In the city, optimism about the economic outlook drove shares up to another record high. They've risen 21% in 1993. The city is now expecting the Bank of England to cut interest rates further. Economists predict that the effect of the delayed tax increases in the last 2 budgets is bound to hamper recovery. Even the Treasury is resigned to this happening. To counter that effect, a cut in interest rates before the spring is now seen as inevitable. Ian Carson,
BBC News at the Treasury.
Eurotunnel has been given an extra 10 years to operate the Channel Tunnel before it has to hand it over to the British and French governments. The company will now receive ticket revenues for 65 years instead of 55. In return, Eurotunnel is giving up its claim for compensation against the two governments over changes to safety rules which have increased construction costs. The tunnel is scheduled to open in May. The performance of the Euro Disney theme park outside Paris has been dreadful, according to the Disney Corporation's annual report. The corporation is prepared to help Euro Disney reach a sound financial footing, but says that it will not let it jeopardize the parent company's health. In the last financial year, Euro Disney made a loss of around £600 million. Euro Disney and Disney are engaged in talks with bankers to restructure the company's debt. The National Union of Teachers is calling for a nationwide survey to determine the extent of asbestos in schools. It says thousands of buildings may be affected. The government wants schools to take on the responsibility for repairs and maintenance, but the NUT is concerned that they may not be able to afford to pay the full cost of asbestos removal.
Built in the early 60s, it was only when it came to rewire Tonga Upper School in Bradford that asbestos was discovered. Moving the school into temporary huts and removing the lethal material has cost more than £2 million.
We would not have had the money from our school budget to pay for this, but with extra help that we've had from the council, which acts as broker for us to the Department for Education, they have been able to secure the money to do the works for the school.
The National Union of Teachers is anxious the government makes an exception of asbestos when delegating the responsibility for repairs to schools. But it also says there's still a need to discover the extent of the problem.
I think there needs to be a national audit of all schools so that we can identify the extent of asbestos in the schools, and also particularly ensure that the governors of schools know where the asbestos is, so that when, as they are responsible for minor works within the school, when those works are being carried out, then the work people themselves and the pupils and the teachers are not exposed to the hazard of asbestos being disturbed.
While asbestos is perfectly safe while sealed in walls and ceilings, it's thought thousands of schools have it. The Department for Education has issued advice to schools on how to deal with the problem, and ministers are still discussing the issue of cost. Richard Hannaford, BBC News.
18 countries, including Britain, are preparing to launch the largest single market in the world. The European Economic Area, or EA, which comes into force on the 1st of January, will create a free trade zone stretching from the Arctic to the Mediterranean. The existing single market created by the European Community will be extended to include Norway, Sweden, Finland, Iceland, Austria and Liechtenstein.
Scandinavia is preparing to open up. After years of strict rules, Sweden, Norway and Finland are among the countries joining a new free trade zone, which will cover 370 million people. There'll be fresh opportunities here for British firms as the existing European single market is extended, and legislation which has made imports more expensive is abandoned. Industry in all 18 member states will be subject to just one set of laws, removing unnecessary local regulations. Companies like Volvo in Gothenburg will be able to employ people from Britain and elsewhere without restrictions.
It will be much easier to make business, to trade and to move around. For instance, from 1st of January, it will not be necessary to apply for residence or work permit when you move from one EEA country to another.
At national borders where trucks often face long delays, customs inspections will be eased. Hours spent in hold-ups like this cost businesses millions of pounds a year and hamper efficiency. Paperwork too will be reduced heavily. The changes should save companies in the European Economic Area money and make their products cheaper for customers to buy.
I think we will see that a number of industries will begin to prepare themselves for new forms of competitions, new forms of demand.
Traditional Scandinavian industries such as this salmon farm see the agreement purely in business terms, an opportunity to compete freely for orders. But to the governments involved, it's much more than that. For the Scandinavian countries and Austria, this enlarged trading bloc has as much political as economic significance. It's an important staging post on the road to eventual membership of the European Union. In Scandinavia, people are sceptical about full union membership and the commitment required. But governments hope this interim trade agreement will help persuade some that closer European integration would bring many economic benefits. Jonathan Charles, BBC News.
Sir Jimmy Savile is to step down as the presenter of Jim'll Fix It after 20 years. Sir Jimmy started the programme in 1975. During that time, more than 1,200 people have had their wishes granted by the programme. It's thought that he may now concentrate on other television projects. 3 lorry drivers who spent Christmas in a Turkish jail have arrived back in Britain. Tony Quinn, Peter Thomas and Graham Quinn say that they were unwittingly caught up in an export fraud involving their cargoes. They were reunited with their families at Gatwick Airport after being released by the Turkish authorities yesterday.
An exultant and emotional reunion awaited the 3 truckers after a month spent in Spartan conditions in Turkish prisons. 14 members of Peter Thomas's family welcomed him back. Tony Quinn and Graham Quinn, who aren't related, were accompanied by their wives on their flight home. They said Christmas in jail had been hellish.
Well, we had bread, cheese, onion and some bread and jam. That was what we had.
That's what we had Christmas Day. Conditions were terrible. Human excrement on the walls in the cell, which we had to clean out before we moved in it, by the way. Stunk of urine.
The truckers had been suspected of involvement in a fraud known as imaginary exports, carrying less than their documents declared to take advantage of export incentives. They said they only learned of it from their cellmates.
I mean, no one in authority on the Turkish side has ever came to us and said, well, look, blah, 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 this has been going on for so many years. We're sorry to tell you, but you're going to finish up in prison because there's only X amount of goods on your vehicle.
The truckers have been asked to return to Turkey in the new year as possible witnesses. They say they're reluctant to go. Their lorries and personal possessions have been impounded. They say they're only intent now on rest and a belated Christmas celebration. Gary Lloyd, BBC News, Gatwick Airport.
Finally, the main news again. The County Council, which sent a young offender on safari at taxpayers' expense, has called a temporary halt to further trips. The centre which organised it insists that it was not a holiday. And that's it tonight from the BBC Newsroom. So from all of us here, good night.